Welcome to the Living the Dream podcast with Curveball. If you believe, you can achieve. Welcome to the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, a show where I interview guests that teach, motivate, and inspire. Today, I am joined by author, visionary leader, and speaker, Michael Walsh. Michael works with business owners and senior business leaders to help their businesses grow to levels that they never expected. So we're going to be talking to him about everything that he does, everything that he's up to, and what he's going to be up to in the future. So, Michael, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me here.
Why don't you start off by telling everybody a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I just recently celebrated the 30th anniversary of our business, where what we do is we help people grow their companies consistent with whatever their goals and commitments are in their lives. And when I'm not busy doing that, my wife and I spend time traveling, and we absolutely love where we live, which is in beautiful Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. Our company helps people in Canada, the United States, and in different parts of Europe, mostly the UK, to grow. So that's a little bit about me, other than the fact that I absolutely love sports. Big hockey fan, big football fan, and season ticket holder of both the Vancouver Canucks and the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah.
So,
Chiefs. We definitely like the Chiefs.
yeah, love those Chiefs.
So tell us about how you got into doing what you do and explain to the listeners what you actually do.
Okay, so how I got into it, I had come from a background, an undergraduate of a double major of commerce and economics, and so business degree from the University of Toronto, and I was actually doing tax and financial planning with different clients, and we were involved with one particular client, and this was a principal and his wife, and the guy at the time, this was back in 1995. The guy at the time was making about $90,000. He had 30,000 deducted from his his taxes. So we have a thing in Canada called a T4, which is the equivalent of your W-2, and he had $30,000 withheld in taxes. We actually were involved with him with a real estate investment. We ended up getting him $27,000 back in his taxes, and we did back-to-back tax returns for him and his wife, charged him $1,500. He was delighted with that, and on we went. Next year came about, did the exact same thing, used the same investment, were able to get the $27,000 back from the tax man again. So his net tax was again about $3,000. Charged him $1,500 again, and he's like, "Why are you charging me?" And I'm like, "Okay, we just did your returns, and that's what it costs for the receipt." Yeah, but Intuit, or the equivalent of what at the time was the equivalent of TurboTax, and he says that could have cost me a couple of $100. Why am I paying you $1,500? And I'm like, okay, did I mention that you're getting the 27,000 back? He says, yeah, but you did that last year. What do you got new for me? And Curtis, I got to tell you, I stopped and I thought, there is only so much tax you can save a person. It's hard to save them more tax than they paid. And if you put them in higher yield investments, people do lose their money. But if you can teach somebody how to sell more, they'll keep paying you more. There's no lid on that one. So it actually led to me shifting gears, and I actually opened my own shop because we were doing personal planning and corporate planning at the time. And it was started with helping people, outsource sales management, helping people with sales strategies, things like that. And then as I was learning from clients, then we started learning about HR things and how to hire smarter and stuff like that. But again, it was clients that might have been good at sales, but they wanted help with HR. Another client, wanted help with sales, but they were brilliant at HR. And so, they were happy to actually support us or support me and teach me the various aspects. And then, taking different courses and things in time, I actually went back and got my MBA, and just sort of quietly grew the business from there. And 30 years later, here I am. I've written 3 books. I've written about 15 different business related programs. We actually help people. One of the things we do in the States, actually, that's kind of interesting is um, I've I'm one of the co-founders of a company called Founders First Capital Partners, or at least I did at the time. I started with them when they started about 9 years ago, and I actually helped them build programs to support the people that they deal with. And these people deal with people in underserved communities. So they deal with women in business, ethnic minorities, people with disabilities, people with military veterans, and people in economically devastated zones who are interested in growing a business, and we actually gave them access and tools. Now, if somebody doesn't have all those, they still help them do the same things, but it was a venue that's and is a venue that's available to people that others might otherwise overlook. And so that's one of the things that I find that I'm doing that's really satisfying. And we built boot camps for the actual participants, and now I'm actually working with them again, helping them build advisory services for the advisors of people who actually get funding from their funding organizations, for example. So the long and the short of what I do is I actually help people grow their companies. If somebody wants to double, triple, quadruple, or some larger, multifold of business, we actually help them. We help them do that. We help them scale, in support of whatever their goals are for reach, for impact, for financial, independence, for legacy, stuff like that. So that's what I do.
Well, let's talk about some of the things that can impede a service-based business, at every milestone of growth. Talk about, that and how you help people involved in these businesses get around that.
Great question. I love what you're asking because, in fact, in the latest book that I just published, we talk about that. Basically, here's what I've discovered. There are as many ways to grow a business as there are people because everybody's got different skills and strengths. Um, and they each bring their different approaches to the table. But the problems are very similar. And one of the things that I found was that after somebody gets through the first million in revenue, getting the first million in revenue is a big, huge milestone. And it's the difference between surviving in a business or not. But once they're past that first million, they usually aim for the next milestone. And of course, after 1 million in revenue, people typically aim for 2 million. And if they achieve 2 million, they want to go for five. If they achieve five, they want to go for 10. If they achieve 10, they want to go for 20. And far fewer people achieve these additional milestones. And the reason is because there's these underlying issues that sort of catch people as far as that's concerned. And one of the things that I find is that, entrepreneurs are pretty savvy people. If you can see a problem, you can deal with it. If you can't see a problem, but you know it exists, again, you can probably deal with it. It's the ones that you can't see, you don't even know they exist, even if they got you. Those are the problems that really tend to plague entrepreneurs, and they really impede their growth. So, for example, if somebody is getting close to 2 million, I mean, that first million, you're hiring a lot of utility players and people that can actually do a lot of different things. Because the truth is, you just don't have enough money to go around to have specialists in different zones. Well, somewhere between 1 and 2 million, you have to start hiring more people that actually start to specialize in things. But what you find is that you don't have enough management support. And so what people typically do is they'll actually, the strongest person on their team, they trust the most. So let's say I've got Sally on my team. I really trust Sally. She does, she gets it. She delivers every time. The customers love her. And you know what? So I make Sally a manager so that she can actually teach the others to do, what she's been doing for the most part, or I've been doing with Sally as we've been growing this thing. And just because Sally is brilliant at actually delivering with clients doesn't make her a brilliant manager. as far as that's concerned. So at 2 million, that's some of the stuff that they hit. And again, there's other underlying issues that they hit at 5, again at 10, and in this chasm between 12 and 20 million. So all the way along, these things happen. And if you had to zero down to see what is the real issue, what I found was that it's actually more than one issue. So first of all, at every milestone of growth, people outstrip their structures. Now, Curtis, I don't think that's any surprise. If somebody is at a $2 million business, they obviously need different tools to run, say, a $10 million business. I mean, the structures and systems and processes you have at 2 million, they just no longer apply at 10, sort of thing. And sure enough, by 5, you've outstripped them, and again at 10. The second dynamic that happens, though, and some people are aware that they're outstripping structures, and they see that and they feel the pain, and then they identify the structures. But there's another complicating factor in there. If I go between 2 and 5 million, I'm adding people. And if you and I were to take a look at relationships, Curtis, you know, and I mean, we just met each other, but you don't control the relationship with me, and I don't control the relationship that I have with you, but we both influence that relationship. So this relationship is this thing that sits between you and I that we both have influence over, but neither one of us has direct control because we don't actually control the other person. And so as you grow, the numbers of relationships just actually, they multiply. Like, they get very large very quickly. And so as a result, what's happening is you've got business owners they're outstripping their structures, and they're dealing with increased complexity because of all these different relationships that are going on. And so what happens is the response that people typically have, nobody wants to do this, but what they end up doing is they end up trying to, as I fix the structures, I start to bring in ones that try to control people's behavior, because I got to have some sort of control. Otherwise, this thing is getting completely out of hand. And that's where business owners get in trouble. And the structures are all different at those different milestones, but the dynamic is the same. If you try to control your people, it just doesn't work. So that's really where they get stuck.
Okay, let's talk about how business owners and business managers view their business, whether it's a well-oiled machine or an intelligent ecosystem.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that is that a lot, this notion of a business running like a well-oiled machine came from the industrial age. Before the Industrial Revolution, people used to train and support their people, but it was usually through apprenticeship. You'd learn from the master. So whether I'm an architect or I'm an engineer or I'm a blacksmith or I'm a doctor, there'd be somebody that actually teaches me, and I do all the Joe jobs and the legwork, and that's, in return they teach me to become a professional as far as that side of it's concerned. And I, in turn, make sure they get value because, I actually put in hard work and their business grows as a result of that. Then, so it used to be a journeyman or a journey person, I guess, and their apprentices. And what happens, though, is when the industrial age hit, what occurred was there was a lot of mass production of products, and the use of assembly lines came in. And the problem is, if I've got 20 people who are veterans, and they each have, say, 2 or 3 apprentices, these 20 veterans are teaching their apprentices in their own way. So you have different people learning different things, and they have different methodologies. But if you put them all on an assembly line, the long and the short of it is that you get a lumpy assembly line. So the management changed at that point. So what happened was that they said, this has got to run like a well-oiled machine. So instead of having one apprentice learning 6 things, I had 6 different people who each do one thing. And so they became cogs in a system. And the big difference between, a well-oiled machine and an intelligent ecosystem is that in a machine, the employees become cogs in that system. If you have a car, okay, the people that own the car are the people for whom the car benefits. If you own, So in a business, if I treat the business like a vehicle like that, then the business is for the owners, and then the employees really are parts of the machinery. The difference, though, is in an ecosystem, it's not for the owners; it's for everybody. An ecosystem has to work for everybody, or it just doesn't work. So what happens is it absolutely needs to benefit the owners, but it has to benefit the employees. It has to benefit the clients and customers. It has to benefit suppliers. The whole thing is very different. And there's really a balance point that needs to be gained. And the balance point shifts based on how many people are in there and what the practices are. But that type of a system in a product-based environment, people could get away with a well-oiled machine. Although I got to say, when they came up with assembly lines, that's when unions started to come in to place. The truth is that the business owners, the capitalists, they didn't care. They paid the extra money through the unions, for what employees were complaining about. They didn't change the systems. It was way too lucrative to change. But when you go from a product, as long as the inputs and the outcomes are predictable, you're in a situation where you can break down the algorithm between the start and the finish, and you can actually parse it out into pieces and give it to people. But in a service-based business, you know what? The answers are far more complex. There's many ways to get it right. There's also many ways to get it wrong. And you need the thinking of everybody at the table to participate. So if I don't have the thinking of both the veterans and the newbies, I'm in a situation where we may actually overlook a number of different things. So I need the creativity of everybody in a service-based environment, or else it just doesn't work. That's why an ecosystem works far better in a service-based environment. And we're well past the Industrial Revolution. We're in and through. We're getting through the information age, and we're into a network world. And in fact, with AI, over the next 5 to 8 years, we'll be complete with the information age because everybody will just have all the information that's available. And I suspect that we'll bring on the next stage, whether it's the age of creativity or something else that comes up from that. But what's happening is in a machinist in a mechanistic world where people are treated like machines, you have to have predictable inputs and outcomes. If I'm building cars, you know what, they all have to have the same buttons for that particular model. If I'm building services, it's not like that at all. So the ecosystem is the one that works there. Unfortunately, we've been raised that management is I'm the boss, you're the employee, you have to do what I say. And that's far more closely tied to the mechanistic approach rather than the more holistic approach that needs to occur in service-based companies.
Well, I know in your bio, you talk about the two core issues that clash and create problems. Were those the ones you're discussing? If not, tell us about those issues.
Well, one of them is, in fact, outstripping the structures, that I'd alluded to. The second one is actually a lack of understanding of what drives human behavior. When you multiply the number of relationships that are there by adding more people, it really feels like herding cats. And again, if things get out of control, but here's the piece that they don't tell you. There's actually structures to behavior. And if we just take a little bit of time to spend, on things that we, for the most part, we kind of have an idea about, but nobody actually thinks of a business in these terms. But if you can actually identify a few core basic elements of human behavior and you work with those actively, you'd be surprised at how many of the issues you have in working with people, they actually just dissipate or go away altogether. So the four that I actually focused on in the last book that I wrote, it was or were number one, we all have the biological need to survive. We will do what it takes to survive. Number two, we have an innate desire to thrive. So if we're not under attack or feeling like we're unsafe, then we have this natural tendency to want to actually thrive. So survive and thrive are always at play on a regular active basis. The third element that I play with is the notion of, we both have the need and the desire to connect with others because together we're stronger. So if I'm connecting with others, I can keep myself safe. But I also, if safety is not an issue, I'm also in a situation where I can actually enjoy the benefits of thriving with others because, again, together we're stronger. And the fourth element that we've played with is people also have the ability to adapt to a changing environment, even if we don't like it. Nobody expected us to do as well as we did with the pandemic. I mean, if I had asked one of the clients that I was dealing with at the time, could you possibly have your people work from home? And they're like, no, I would never have predicted that we could have done that. And, and if you'd asked me, I'd say it'd take 6 months to a year just to acclimate people to do it. But when there's a threat to our health, everybody was home within a 2-week period and set up with computers at home, and business continued in many circles. Now, in places where you had to visit others, like restaurants and that, they actually found different ways to cope and adapt. So we have the ability to adapt when the chips are down, basically, as far as that's concerned. So the more, what I find is the two issues of stripping our structures and just the proliferation of more people when, as we grow, if by understanding human behavior, the survive, thrive, connect, and adapt, just those basic elements of human behavior, you'd be amazed at how far you can actually go in a business to overcome the issues that you face as you grow.
Let's take a quick break.
Okay, everybody, it's Michael E. Cullen II.
And I'm Sesame and Carta from the All Too Real 2 podcast. We're passionate about movies, TV, and pretty much all things pop culture.
Dive into the chaos of failed sitcoms, direct-to-video sequels, and the quirky realms of cinema and TV.
Join us every Thursday for your dose of All Too Real 2 entertainment.
We'll guide you through debates like whether Howard the Duck qualifies as a superhero.
Ponder if Larry the Cable Guy could be the new Rock or Schwarzenegger.
Discover if some shows and movies should have stayed in the cutting room.
Ever heard of a sitcom featuring that dictator with the funny mustache? Well, we watched it.
We're dedicated to unraveling the peculiarities of pop culture, sometimes with awesome guests.
So, if you're into the eccentric world of pop culture,
listen and subscribe to All Too Real 2.
Available wherever you find podcasts
and on Age of Radio.
Okay, well, let's talk about the freedom framework, to talk about that and how that can be incorporated into businesses to help them grow.
Sure. The one of the things that I looked at as I teased out what the issues were is it's like, so how do you actually use, first of all, an acknowledgement or understanding of outstripping your structures combined with just the nature of human behavior. And what I found was that there were 7 or 8 different elements that people needed to address. And if they could address those in a service-based business, they actually had a much better chance of actually having a really, really strong business and not actually suffering from getting blocked. So the first element of that is just to rethink the core of the business. Now, any business, the core of a business has always been your ability to generate results that customers want that also give you profit. That's always been the core of the business, is that ability to generate the result for the customer that you can do at a profit. With the new environment, you're in a situation, given how important people are to service-based businesses, what they needed to add a third piece. You see, people are the ones, teams of intelligent knowledge workers in a service-based environment are the ones that actually generate the result. But with such a transactional, mechanistic process, people are voting with their feet. They're like, you don't treat me well. I don't want to be here. And so they just leave. They either leave altogether or they do what is now called quiet quitting, which is really just a new name for employee disengagement. And so what happens is that the social contract between an employer and an employee has changed. It used to be, I give you pay, you show up, you do your job. Now the employees want more, but so do the employers. So if I take a look at what the boss wants somebody that can actually generate a result with individual client situations. So that's the first thing. The second thing that a boss wants is they want the people who can work with each other to generate results that are larger than any single person can generate alone. So far we got two: generate individual client results and then work collectively to generate larger client results. The third, on projects and things like that. The third element is these things actually develop into a strong corporate culture. And that's another thing that a boss wants as an outcome of having the first two. And the fourth thing that the boss wants is, with 1, 2, and 3. So if I've got people that can generate individual results, they can work together to generate collective results. You build a culture where they feel like they have each other's back, stuff like that. Then you're in a situation where the fourth element plays, and the fourth element is progress towards the larger purpose of the company. So those are the four things that an employer wants. An employee, on the other hand, first of all, they want four things too. But the first thing they want is they want to be paid, obviously. I mean, that they need money for what they do. The second thing they want, though, is they want to learn and grow and develop as a professional. Whether they're in professional services or whether they're in skilled trades or whether they're in training development, whatever the service is that they're involved in, they want to get better at it. And you find that the more an employer is willing to actually support somebody's growth in their profession or their trade, you're in a situation where they do much better in terms of the like they don't have to pay the top dollar. They have to get the money right, but they don't have to be the top payer in the universe because people really do value the growth and development, not just the money. So they get paid, they get professional growth. The third thing they want is they want meaningful work. Now, if every job gives them access to growing as a professional, like if there's training built in and on the job growing built into all the different projects, meaningful work shows up in spades. And the fourth thing that employees want is they want access to meaningful relationships. So the employers want somebody that can deal with things on an individual basis. They want somebody that can deal with things, or work together to do it collectively. They want corporate culture to grow and strengthen, and they want progress towards the purpose. The employee wants to be paid. They want to have professional growth. They want meaningful work and meaningful relationships. And if you use that social contract in a service-based environment, then what happens is instead of just having the ability to generate a result that generates value for customers and profit for the owner, put the people, these individual teams of knowledge workers as part of that core. Now you need a third thing, which is you've got value for the customers, you got value for the company in terms of profit. You also need value for the employees in terms of their professional growth. So the core of the business needs to be rethought to include the people in it, not just give them lip service like we think you're important, but we're actually not going to build that into how we work with you. So that rethinking the core underpins all the other elements of the Freedom Framework. So there's hiring smart. There's basically training and growing your people. And there's ways to do that. There's focusing more on teams as you grow, as opposed to getting into competency frameworks and things. There's growing managers, there's developing leaders, and then there's actually preparing for and dealing with unexpected change. So collectively, those are all the elements that are there as part of that Freedom Framework. And I mean, I could go into detail with each of them, but that's, at the overview level, Curtis, that's basically what it's about.
Okay. Tell us about any upcoming projects that you're working on that people need to be aware of.
Well, we're actively working with different companies to actually support their growth. It's interesting because I was reading an advanced copy of a book by a gentleman by the name of Ben Hardy. And Ben's written a lot of different really progressive pieces. And he actually touched on a strategy that we've been using for years. And that's that, we all see that there's the past, the present, and the future. And most of us think that time is fixed. But if we stop and look at it for a second, we actually notice that the past doesn't actually live in the past because we don't actually go back to our past. It's a memory in our present. So if it's a memory in our present, and then I look at the future, it's a perception about my future. But the only place I can exist at any point in time is in my present. And one of the things that Hardy did a really great job on, he's actually got a book that's his book that's coming out. I believe it's in June or July, the end of June or sometime in July. It's called The Science of Scaling. And the guy's done a masterful job at describing how you can actually use goals and time as a tool. So Curtis, let me ask you a couple of questions. Let's say you had, I don't know, say a $5 million business, and your goal was to get to 5.5 million, a 10% increase 5 years from now. Do you think that'd be a big, huge stretch?
And I was saying it depends on the strategies that you implement.
Sure. But do you think that for that 10%, increase, do you think you have lots of different pathways or only a few?
Yeah, I think you have lots of different pathways.
Sure. Now let's change the game a little bit. Let's say you wanted to go from 5 to 10 million in 2 years. Do you still have as many pathways or have they narrowed right down on you?
I think they've narrowed down.
Exactly. They have. Now, one of the things that have, and this is the reason that most people don't actually scale their companies, is because what happens is they say they want to get these large scale growth, things occurring, but what they don't do is they don't actually tap the power of having an impossible goal with an impossible timeline and the innovative thinking that's required to find what are those 2 or 3 pathways. Because most of my pathways, if I was going to do a 10% increase over 5 years, I got lots of pathways that I could do that. But if I want to double my business and I only got a couple of years to do it in, I better pick correctly because most of my strategies won't work. I love your comment that it depends on the strategies. I completely agree with that. But all of a sudden, I have to now pick the right strategies, right? So what's happening is it really narrows my focus so that I only focus on the things that are actually going to matter for that result. And so what happens is, Hardy does a great job of talking about the difference between what's the signal that you want to follow and what's the noise that just, derails you. And that's consistent with the approach that I use. Is if you could use those types of goals and that type of time frame as tools, because you don't have to double it in 2 years. And you may decide, well, 2 years, I'm not going to double it in 2. I'll double it maybe in 4 years or something, when it feels like you can actually believe that you can do it. But the bottom line is that if I use a larger goal and I actually play with the time, it requires me to rethink which strategies I use. Because contrary to what most people believe, getting a bigger company is not a matter of just doing more work. It's a matter of just picking a different strategy. But of course, you already know that, Curtis, because your comment was brilliant. You said, well, it would depend on which strategies that I used. So I know you're already there as far as that's concerned. So by accelerating goals and looking at more compressed time frames, all it does is it just requires me to look at different strategies, ones that I wouldn't have considered had I had a longer time frame. So one of the things that we're doing is we're actually supporting people in how do I actually achieve goals that I originally thought were impossible. But that, when I stop and think about it, there is a way to do it. Now, there's not 20 or 50 ways to do it, but there are 1 or 2 or 3 ways to do it. And so how do we partner with people to really support them in those types of endeavors? And one of the areas that I'm personally focused on is, when you're dealing with businesses that make a positive impact in their community or in the world, those are the ones we actually really enjoy participating in because they really make a meaningful difference, not only to the people that are within the companies, but people that are out in the communities, as far as this side of it's concerned. So that's where my focus is, a lot of it at this point in time.
Okay, well, we're almost out of time. So close us out with throwing out your contact info so people can keep up with what you're up to and also close us out with some final thoughts. Maybe if there was something I forgot to talk about that you would like to touch on, or any final thoughts you have for the listeners.
Okay, thank you. So if somebody does want to get in touch with me, they could we go to the website. It's www.walsh, WALSH, businessgrowth.com. And or if you want to find the latest book that I just published on May 13th, it's called Freedom by Design: The Established Business Owner's Guide to Grow, make an impact, and find the joy again. So, but if you just look up at Freedom by Design and type in Walsh, whether you're in Canada, the United States, in Europe, in Mexico, Australia, we've got it all over the place. And Amazon.com and Amazon.ca are both doing quite well with that. As far as that's concerned, I'm really happy with the progress we're making there. The key is, if we can make a difference, what I find is together we really are stronger. And the final thoughts that I have is, a lot of times people don't think it's possible to grow, or they think there's something wrong with them, or they think that business is just hard and you can only get so far. Actually, if you can identify the impediments that get in the way, it's actually way more accessible to grow your company in support of whatever your goals and dreams are than you realize. You just need to figure out how. And with that, I want to thank you for the time that you've taken with me, Curtis, and in inviting me here to join with you today.
Oh, I thank you for coming on and enlightening our listeners. We have a lot of business owners and people out there that's definitely going to be able to take advantage of this. I want you to follow, rate, review, share this episode to as many people as possible. Follow us on your favorite podcast platform. Visit www.curveball337.com for more information on the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast. Thank you for listening and supporting the show. And Michael, thank you for all that you do. And thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Curtis.
For more information on the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, visit www.curveball337.com. Until next time, keep living the dream.